Hey, now welcome to the show, where the wind's blowing strong and the truth can flow. This is the good oil. Catch a vibe today with Cam Slater leading us all the way from the heart of the...
Well, welcome to episode 18 of the Good Oil podcast. Jami-Lee,
Good to see you, Cam.
how are you, mate?
Great. Glad you said, mate. Known you for 20 years now. I was just having a look at when I first met you. 20 years we've been friends.
I know, it's a long time, isn't it?
It is. Wish I'd listened to you a bit more.
Oh,
Which you tell me all the time.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You can take advice or not take advice. Sometimes it ends well and sometimes it doesn't.
Do you remember when we first met?
I'm pretty sure it was outside a supermarket somewhere.
Something like that, probably campaigning, but I remember distinctly it was Christmas time. It was not long after I'd just been elected to the Manukau City Council. I think I was 19 at the time, or 18, and you met and said, I've started this blog, you should have a read of it. Had never heard of whale oil before, and friendship went from there.
Well, 20 years goes quick, doesn't it?
It does indeed.
So what do you tell us about who Jami-Lee Ross is? I mean, you did go to Dilworth, I know that. I'm sure there's going to be some interesting stories about that. but why don't you tell people the story of Jami-Lee Ross, how you grew up, and we'll get up into the more, reasonable time frame that people can actually remember, and then we'll have a chat from there.
Sure. I guess that one of the sad parts of being a bit known like you and I is people can caricature you into one small part of your life, but that's not who you actually are.
No.
I did get into politics young, but before that I went to Dilworth School. I went to Dilworth because I was raised by my grandmother in a state house in Papatoetoe. She was a very strong influence in our family, and my mother was young. She was 19 when she got pregnant. Father donated some DNA up the back of the army barracks, never to be seen again. My mother had me young, probably wasn't in the right space to look after a small child, so my grandmother took me over, and she was basically my influence from a very young age. And she reckons one of the best parenting decisions she did was getting me into Dilworth School. It's a fabulous school, has had some bad press recently. Can't say that I saw too much in the time I was there. A lot of that was probably before my intake of the school, but it was a great school and gave me a great education. My passions when I was growing up was aviation and politics. And when I was fresh out of school, I went and did a commercial pilot license. So that's my, tertiary training. And then being a bit of a political geek, I used to go along to the Manukau City Council meetings. And when I was 18, 2004, I thought, I can probably do better than these old guys that sit around and don't do much at all. Stood for the city council. Best advice I got from people like your dad that I'd met in the National Party was knock on doors, knock on doors, knock on doors. I knocked on the same amount of doors roughly that I got in votes, got elected to the City Council and went from there.
I can remember Morris Williamson was talking to me a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying about when he first met you, and he was out door knocking, and I think you were with your granny at that point, just down the road from where he lived.
We lived about 20 houses down from him on Fisher Parade.
Yeah, and he was knocking on the doors, and the councillor at the time was Ken Yee, wasn't it?
That's right.
And he just lived up the road from you as well, if I remember correctly.
Ken lived in the area. Sharon Stewart lived in the area too. I went and I got involved in the National Party as a teenager, so I'd seen Morris a few times, but I was just bolshy. Went into his office, sat down, and
well, your granny. The way that Morris tells it is, your granny said, "Oh, Jami-Lee wants to be a politician.
Yes.
Can we sit down and have a chat about that?" And then some weeks later or so, you bowled into the office with Granny, and he steered you in the right direction.
Yeah, I went in there and said, hey, I want to be a city councillor and want to be an MP one day, and he was great for advice. You know, those old guys like Morris, who had been around in politics a long time, they had so much knowledge, and politics was really grounded in local community stuff back then when Morris was an MP. I think they get a bit divorced from the community they represent these days, but Morris was great, and I will forever remember and be thankful for the support people like Morris, your dad, Even old Neil Morrison, who Morris beat in 1987, was a great support too. He was a city councillor when I got elected there.
Of course, Morris had his own troubles with the National Party in 2002. I was standing actually beside him that night when the TV cameras turned up. It was an absolute debacle. Bill English had got the lowest score ever for a National Party in an election, and Morris said that there was some boils that needed lancing. And I was standing right next to him when he did that. And then the National Party tried to rinse him. And, of course, getting a sitting MP out is kind of difficult. And he just stared them down, sat on the back bench for a while and waited out the demise of Bill English.
Yeah, I probably should have taken some lessons from that and waited out the demise rather than blow the house up. But guess I'm not as wise as Morris.
Well, he'd been around since 87 by 2002, so he'd been around a fair bit at that point.
The other stumble Morris had was 2014, I think, when he resigned as a minister. And I was in the Whip's office at the time, and one of the things that the National Party believes in is when someone's being exiled, you just support the team and leave them out to exile. But I thought, no, stuff it. Morris has been great to me over many years.
Yeah, I remember you standing there beside him.
I'm going to stand behind him and support him because he is somebody. Unfortunately, the media and the political parties boil down your whole career into that one instance. It's wrong, and I wasn't going to let people think that nobody in the party supported him when he had a huge amount of support.
Yeah, I mean, I do remember you standing there behind him, giving that support, which often you see ministers making speeches and things like that, and there's this whole array of MPs that are sitting there behind them, all nodding knowingly about the wonderful announcement that's being made. It all looks so contrived and so performative.
I used to be in the Whip's office and we would organise people to go along and stand behind the Prime Minister or the Minister, so there was people there. But I was, being in the Whip's office, I guess I was pseudo-defying the leadership a little bit by supporting somebody that had just been asked to resign.
Well,
but that's what you do. You should support your mates, and that's what I did.
Well, hopefully that's something that we've taught you. The boys at lunch
yes.
showed you what mates are all about.
Well, as you obviously know, but your listeners don't, one of my best influences in my life, and I think yours too, is our shared friend Paul, and he's been an amazing mentor. And I wouldn't have met Paul if it wasn't for you, so thank you, Cam.
Well, I've been doing those lunches for about 27 years or something like that. Mm-hmm. And you've probably been doing them for a little bit less, but a long time nonetheless.
Absolutely.
And it's a great bunch of mates, and there isn't a problem that I don't think that we couldn't solve by putting the problem on the table and talking about it.
Well, when I look back at some of the life errors I've made, I think had I discussed it with some mates, probably would have made some different decisions.
Let's go back to when you first stood for council. You're 18. It's kind of daunting. You knocked on a lot of doors and then you got yourself elected. And you were in there with Sharon Stewart.
Yeah, a lot of people, it's local body elections at the moment, at the time we're recording this, a lot of candidates think, all you have to do to campaign is just put some signs up and that's it, and people will just vote for you. That's not how it works. If you want to actually win votes in an election, you need to go and meet the people, you need to talk to them on their doorsteps, you need to engage with them and give them a reason to vote for you. Just putting your sign up and saying, look, I'm this person, I've got a nice sign, that doesn't win you elections. I learnt the hard way, because when you want to get involved in politics at such a young age, if you're not a celebrity or you're not somebody with some big background behind you, you have to do it the hard way. And that's what I did. Knocked on doors, handed out flyers at the supermarket, and just grinded my way through politics that way. But that's how candidates and MPs and councillors used to do things. They used to go out there and actually talk to people.
And ask people for their votes. Can you vote for me, please?
Yeah. The only real time in a parliamentary election where a political party candidates do that is when they're seeking selection and they have to do the hard yards trying to win votes of members. And that's where celebrities that try and stand for the National Party come a cropper, because they think they can just put their name out there and people will vote for them. Political parties, when they select their candidates, they appreciate people who put the hard yards in and work hard and knock on doors and talk to the members directly.
Well, we'll cover off your selection for the National Party.
Yes.
Because that was a bit of fun, actually. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. You get into the Manukau City Council. Who have you got as mayor at this stage?
Sir Barry Curtis was the mayor of Manukau at the time for the first term, and then Len Brown for the second term. You mentioned at the start earlier about how I was young and getting involved. Sir Barry Curtis had been mayor longer than I'd been alive. I was quite nervous the very first few times that I stood up and spoke in the council, because Barry was this huge personality in Manukau and Auckland and longest serving mayor of New Zealand at the time. But you know what? I learned a lot from him too, because he was somebody who put his life's blood work into his job and building those connections. And he was only mayor for that long because he had done those hard yards over decades, and he listened to people and he grew a city and he actually got things done. And part of the reason why I'm now coming full circle and standing for the Auckland Council at a local board level now is because I could get more done as a city councillor. Members of Parliament, unless you're in the top 5, cannot get much done. I got more done in 6 years as a city councillor than I did in a decade in Parliament. And I learnt that from people like Sir Barry, who put the hard yards in and actually got outcomes for people.
But Barry's so approachable. I mean, I used to go for walks, and he'd be sitting on his deck overlooking the beach where he was living at the time, and he'd call out and say, "Oh, hi Cam, how's it going?" He was so approachable. I mean, our politics are so different, but he was always really, really engaging. But the one person he didn't like was who replaced him, and that's Len Brown. And it's for a really personal reason that he disliked him as well. It's because Len Brown fired his driver. Right?
Yes.
Barry Curtis had a council car and he had a driver.
Chris.
Yeah. And Len Brown fired his driver.
Okay.
And after that, Barry Curtis didn't have the time of day for Len Brown. And he told me this one day, standing on the beach there talking and having a look at the tide coming in and out. And that told me a lot about the person. I mean, my mum taught me a lot about politicians, and she said to me, very often politicians, they trample on everybody's head climbing up the ladder, and then they forget at some point you're going to have to come back down that ladder and pass the people that you trampled on. Yes. And Mum would always go out when we had ministers there or prime ministers staying. They'd park their car out the front. The driver would sit in the car for hours on end. She would go out there and bring the drivers in and ironically take them to the pool room, which was downstairs with a pool table. That's where I learnt about politics, listening to the drivers while playing pool with them as a kid.
You should get most of the gossip from the drivers
Absolutely, and that I can again remember Mum absolutely tearing strips off cabinet ministers. She didn't care what their position was. She had a point to make and to ram home to them. And I can remember her once telling Ozzy Malcolm off, and this was just before they lost in '84. I can remember her saying, trouble with you, Ozzy, is that you go down to Wellington and you forget everything you've heard from the local people in Auckland, and you just do what everybody does in Wellington. And you're going to come a gutser at this next election. And she was 100% right. And
MMP has exacerbated that problem because now the political parties are all powerful.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you ran up against is the party apparatus. Mm-hmm. I mean, you were part of the party apparatus, but you ran up against it. Well, again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Sure. I just want to focus still on Manukau City. And, you get in there, you're new, you're nervous. How did you find your way around what you wanted to achieve within the council? Or does it just sort of come at you at 100 miles an hour once you're a councillor?
There's some people there and there's some staff members who are great. You probably gets a bad rap for some of the public decisions he was involved in, but Lee Autumn was a really good chief executive of that council. Barry Curtis, whilst not a mentoring type, just sitting and watching him and absorbing it, you learnt huge amounts from someone like that, a giant in local government. I sat next to Neil Morrison and in the council chamber, and Neil was the social credit leader at the 84 election, and he'd won the 87 election. He'd won the seat of Pakuranga off the National Party in 84, and then lost it to Morris again in 87. But he was somebody who was grassroots and really knew how to get the job done for people. Len Brown came in the second term, and I'm sometimes thought of as someone that gets in there and can kick the shit out of people. The first time I probably was involved in a really hard campaign against another politician was when and I know you were involved too, the credit card scandal that Len was involved in. And I have to say, I've seen Len a few times over the years since he left the mayoralty of Auckland, and we've chatted, and on a personal level I quite like him. But that at the time, that was a really good example of how if you want to play the hard knuckle politics, you can really turn what was a small issue into something pretty big in the lead up to an election. And that was probably the first time we had a hard go at that. You did a good number on Len, quite rightly, about 6 years later. But we were able to turn his credit card spending. We turned several $100s of credit card spending into weeks and weeks and weeks of
negative
scandal
press for him,
ahead of the 2010 Auckland Council elections when he was up against John Banks. Didn't make a huge amount of difference because he still won. But yeah, that's if you want to be a good opposition politician, you really delve into the detail and you know how to work the press and you know how to work the information over a long period of time by dripping it out and keeping on finding new ways to attack it, you can turn something small into pretty big.
I mean, the thing is Len Brown dug his own grave with that expenses scandal, because there were some things he refused to release, which made everybody wonder what he was hiding. It's like the famous dinner at Valare restaurant.
Yes.
Right? It was something nothing. But he absolutely dug in and refused to say who was there and what were they discussing and why was it council business, why did you pay for it, and all of that. And he just dug in and he just looked guiltier and guiltier and guiltier. And I think when you pressed it home in the council chamber, if I remember correctly, being there, and Jonathan Marshall was there as well, journalist from Sunday Star Times, Len slapped himself silly in front of the cameras.
We put him under so much pressure that he ended up slapping himself in the face and beating his chest in the middle of a speech in the council chamber. It was extraordinary media video at the time, because politicians just didn't do that. And councils didn't really have TV cameras in them very often recording their meetings, but Len managed to do that. Look, I'm aware, talking about this, 15 years later or something, it's almost as if we're discussing with glee hurting someone's reputation. But
they did it to themselves, though.
We're talking here, I think, in this podcast about politics and the art of it and the game. And as somebody who's no longer in Parliament anymore, looking back at the game of politics and how it's played, it's just fascinating, I think, to go through. I'm not sitting here with glee saying we took somebody down. These are tactics that politicians use, and it's helpful, I think, for people to understand how it all works.
Yeah, I mean, Nicky Hager wrote Dirty Politics and tried to say that this is how the right plays politics. They're dirty. The
left is just as bad.
The left is just as bad, if not worse. The lengths they're prepared to go to far exceed the things that I might have said or done. I mean, I've done nothing illegal. I've done nothing wrong in anything that I did. I was just effective at doing what I do.
Well, we both have High Court judges that have said we haven't done anything illegal separately.
I've got a High Court judge that said I'm a journalist. So anytime someone says you're not a journalist, I go, oh, but a High Court judge disagrees with you. The thing is that I think the thing that the left wing don't understand is that very often the things that I've done have been simply for fun or to prove a point that it could be done. Case in point was your selection to get the National Party nomination for the Botany by-election after Pansy Wong made a few missteps. I don't know whether or not it was sackable what she did, but it was an opportunity that you grasped with both hands.
Well, I wasn't involved in her downfall at all. That was very much Pete Hodgson, but I was a local representative on the council. I just won my third election onto the Auckland Council, and you say you did it for fun. I say that if you're to have the privilege of being selected as a candidate for a political party, you should have done the hard yards for the party, and the person I was up against, Maggie Barry, had done nothing for the National Party. And when I look back at, say, that the Len Brown credit card thing, I didn't do it for fun. I did it because
asked questions.
I did it because I wanted the next mayor of Auckland to have the best track record of working hard and being an honourable person to be the mayor. And so that's why we exposed something that Len had done.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's not dirty to do a Lagoima request and then to reveal the information that's within that. That's not dirty. That's what a politician, it's what any media should do.
Yeah.
In everything that I've done in politics has been based off of official information requests. The big stories that I've had have been done off Official Information Act requests, or I've been had very good sources who have leaked to me.
Well, if the goal of the opposition in Parliament is to hold the government to account, the role of councillors that aren't part of the mayor's team in a city council is to hold the mayor and the chief executive to account. And that's what we were doing. It was just accountability for public spending.
It kind of kicked off a public spending, like every time the expenses are now released from politicians, there's almost nothing untoward in them. And I put that down to the fact that we did run those Lagoima requests for
Sunlight's the best form of disinfectant.
sunlight, but it lifts the game, right? It lifts the game of the politicians. They're not going to change the way they do it, what they do, but they're going to change the way that they do it, so they don't leave trails anymore.
And you had Jordan Williams on a few weeks ago on your podcast, and the great work they're doing is providing accountability for public officials that otherwise, because of the demise of the mainstream media, don't get the scrutiny that they probably should have on them.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan gets the same criticism that I get. They say to him, oh, hang on, you should be supporting the centre-right. And what they're actually saying when they say that to me, or they say that to Jordan Williams or any other commentator that's coming from the centre-right, is go easy on your own team. And my argument to that is, no, we need to go harder on our own team so they're less shit, and raise the bar. And people say, oh, you shouldn't be criticising John Key, or you shouldn't be criticising Christopher Luxon. Well, why shouldn't I be criticising them? If they're doing stupid things, I want them to be better. I wanted the National Party to be better. They didn't want to be better. So, whatever. I'm going to keep on holding politicians to account. You're out of it now, so you get to see,
Trying to get back in.
with jaded eyes how it works. I mean, and that's the thing I've been trying to do with this podcast, is show people what goes on inside political parties, show people the things that are done behind the scenes, either by civil servants or by lobbyists or politicians themselves. But you would have got to have seen a lot of that once you became the whip.
Yeah. I got into Parliament in 2011 in the by-election. I won the National Party selection, which was quite a fight. The hardest fight in that was winning the selection.
And let's just touch on that then for a little bit. Because you had Maggie Barry, right?
Yes.
Ex-Radio New Zealand. And I rather deviously nicknamed her New Zealand's favourite grandmother. And I found the worst photographs that I could find of her that showed a wrinkled face and, and the wrinkles under her neck and on her hands and things like that. And I portrayed her as hang on, there's a carpetbagger here. You were also up against Darren Batnaga,
That's right, yes.
who had a pedigree in Epsom electorate. and I forget who the others were now, but they were also Rands really. And a lot of people think that you can rig a National Party selection, and having had a go at several of them, trying to either rig them or influence, it's the hardest thing that you've ever seen. You know, people don't understand if you've got, 5 candidates standing for pre-selection, you have to get 50% of those plus one vote in order to get across the line. And there's one delegate. What was the rules back then? There's one for 10, wasn't it?
Delegate for every 15 members up to 60 delegates. But here's how the board does rig.
Oh, yeah, the board
election.
rigs things.
The board rigs the election because if the party membership is too low in that electorate, then the party president gets to select who the delegates are, or it might be the regional chair. But the great and good of the National Party get to choose the delegates. And they did try to rig Botany and Maggie Barry's favour, but they didn't count on the fact that it was probably one of the first times that you and Simon Lusk got involved in selections, if I remember, in a heavy way. But they didn't anticipate that there would be people who would provide scrutiny over the process and actually work hard. And as politics has become more and more professionalised in New Zealand, the emergence of consultants like Simon have really changed the game. And when I said at the start, one of the best people you've ever introduced me to was Paul Honner, our friend. Simon Lusk is another person that you've introduced me to who's had a big and positive impact on my political career.
And the other thing too with that selection was we had at that point the ability to effectively place bets on political outcomes.
Oh, yes.
And so what I was doing on my website is that I would say, oh, look, the odds have shortened on Jami-Lee Ross. And what they didn't realise is that I was putting my own money on there to make the odds shorten so I could then create the narrative.
Gosh, telling everyone the secrets.
Well, it doesn't matter. I don't care. It's not around anymore. But those
predict. That's what it was called.
I predict, yeah. And we were able to... David Farrar
Bloody nanny state put an end to that.
Yeah, the nanny state ended I predict. But like David Farrar would do the same thing on particular outcomes, and he was making money off I predict. I was making money off I predict. It was this very, very small market that was easily manipulated, and we did.
Yeah.
Maggie Barry's odds got very long on.
But what those selections are about, and for people who don't know how a MP is selected, you go through a really rigorous process with the party members, and it's an electorate of 60
people. Well, there's
people.
pre-selection for a start.
That's true. That's how the board kicks out people that they want to rinse and ensure don't get any further in the process. But it's just 60 people that get to make the decision, and they get to choose who their local representative is going to be. And it is the most rigorous political test I think I've been through in any of the elections that I've stood in, is that selection, because those members, they hold that ability to pick and choose who's going to be an MP very sacred, and they work you hard and they grill you hard, and it's not for someone who just wants to carpetbag their way in without any track record at all.
And very often it could be just one person in that room who can sway 20 or 30 others. I still remember being blocked from coming into the botany selection by one of your cantankerous lecturers. Well, he wasn't yours at that point.
He's passed away now.
I know he's passed away now. I'm not going to say his name, but he was a right stroppy bastard, yes. And he wasn't going to let me in to see how the speeches were going and to report on those. It was actually Stephen Joyce who got me in there. He came along and he says, "Oh, come on, Cam," and then he told that fellow to pull his head in.
Well, Stephen Joyce would have known how valuable you were to the National Party.
Yeah, well, that's right. At that stage, I was very valuable to the National Party.
At that stage, you were on the top 10 list of callers for the Prime Minister's office.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember Jason Eade ringing me up one day and saying, "Oh, the bosses are very happy with what you've written. Can you take it down?" And I said, "Well, I don't talk to the monkeys. I talk to the organ grinders." Okay. And but I never got a call to take anything down. I never got told to do anything by the Prime Minister's office ever. I think that's one reason why they probably were quite pleased that Dirty Politics came out. It gave them an opportunity to distance themselves from me.
You know who did that trick to me many years ago, but was very effective? I was trying to get a members bill up on strike breaking when the Ports of Auckland strike was happening, however many years ago. It was
Well, I
10
might have
years
been
ago.
involved in the Ports of Auckland strike.
And I had a bill, and the party, National supported it, ACT supported it, United Future, Peter Dunn wasn't going to vote for it. And I thought, well, my last option here is to go and talk to Winston and ask him for support. And I went over in the Parliament and I kneeled down next to his chair and talked to him about the bill. And he said to me, well, we probably support that. But if you guys really want my vote, why doesn't John Key call me? I said, it's my bill and everything, and I'm supporting it. But he supports it because, the party caucus. Well, if you want my vote, get John Key to give me a call. Of course, never got his vote because John Key wouldn't call him.
But that's Winston to a T, you want... And he does that. There's a way to do things.
Yes.
Everyone's upset about him at the moment because he won't announce what New Zealand's going to do regarding recognising Palestine. And his answer, it tells you everything you need to know. He says, we're going to follow due process. We're going to make sure that everything's correct. In order to recognise a state, you need to have some borders. What are the borders? What would the government be? What does it look like? How does sovereignty over that territory, how does that look? Who's going to enforce it? Who's going to police it? These are all things that a proper state can meet all of that criteria. The only one they meet is that is there a population in place? Yes, there's a population in place. But Winston's very particular about doing those sorts of things. Like, I've never heard Winston Peters talk badly about somebody's partner or wife or like when I saw Stuart.
He believes in respect.
Well, when Stuart Nash was asked an easy question that should be easy to answer and answered with a flippant answer, right? I thought your days in New Zealand First are very limited when I heard that, because that is disrespectful, and Winston Peters does not like disrespectfulness. From his party, from him. He doesn't even do it from himself. Okay, he disrespects journalists, but they deserve it.
It is interesting to see that after decades of the party National Party being ingrained in them that they must hate Winston Peters, that they finally realised they can't get anything done by just waiting out the demise of Winston. They have to actually be respectful to somebody who has the support of a good chunk of voters in New Zealand and is growing.
Yeah, well, you just look at the polls now. We're in midterm or late midterm, and Winston Peters is on a higher percentage now than he got at the election. That's never happened before.
And that's, I don't know if you want to delve into that right now, but that is an aberration when it comes to MMP, and it's a real indicator of how poorly the national government is going, because traditionally under MMP, the minor parties drop midterm and then come back up at the election time. For the minor parties, ACT and New Zealand First, to be as high as they are now, suggests there's a real fundamental weakness within the National Party and how they're governing.
Well, let's just touch on that. What do you see as the there's many things that we could talk about with the National Party, right? But let's just deal with now what we're looking at right now. We are Prime Minister of Christopher Luxon. As you said earlier in this podcast, the reality is if you want to be a politician to make a difference, you have to be in the top 5 people.
Yes.
Right? So we've got Christopher Luxon, we've got Nicola Willis, we've got Chris Bishop. That's 3. There's another 2. And they're so insignificant that even I don't know who would be considered to be that influential in the National Party. But basically those 3 are the top.
Can we just make a comment that I think you would share this view with me on? You and I, those who aren't in the National Party now but were, we don't hate the National Party.
No, we want them to be better.
We want the National Party to be better. I still support the fundamental principles of what National stands for. It's what I signed up for when I was a teenager and took out a membership with the National Party. We want them to do well. We don't hate them. But it's sad to see, as somebody, as you and I have supported centre-right politics for our entire lives to see how the party that should be doing so much better is actually going. Now, the National Party at the moment, great that they won an election, but what they've got is a lack of good, strong leadership. People just assume because Luxon had a similar career to John Key and then entry to Parliament that he is just John Key. He is not.
He is
Christopher
not.
Luxon is
a
no
million
John Key.
miles away from John Key.
I worked with John Key as in the Whip's office as part of that caucus, and my seat was behind his in the Parliament for 4 or 5 years, and I saw how he worked up close. John Key was a masterful politician. I know you don't like everything about him.
Oh, no, I would agree with that. He was a masterful politician.
He was a masterful politician, and he genuinely could read the mood of New Zealand.
Until he
genuinely could read. Well, he got to the point where he wasn't sure if he wanted to continue and could continue reading the mood, but he could read the mood of New Zealand. He knew how to communicate well. He knew how to get the best of ministers. He knew how to ensure that the message of the government was all in line so that they could get the outcomes that they wanted. He was great at that. I'm not seeing that from National. I'm not seeing that strong leadership. I'm seeing sound bites that are done by the ninth floor spin doctors, but I don't see actual real leadership. But I do disagree with some of the commentators that think National's going to change their leader all of a sudden.
No.
Because what those commentators don't understand is the real weakness of National MPs to get together and decide to take somebody out. It almost never happens. The National Party believes in tradition.
The status quo.
In the status quo, and they believe that all they have to do is just sit there and wait. And the other thing that the commentators who are trying to praise Nicola Willis or Chris Bishop as future leaders don't understand is that the only electorate that matters when it comes to who is the leader of the National Party
is the National Party caucus.
Is the National Party caucus. And what we found during the leadership election in 2018, which I was the chief whip of the party for, and I chaired that leadership caucus meeting, because there was no leader to chair the caucus. I chaired the caucus meeting as the chief whip. To win the National Party leadership, you have to have supported the MPs and you have to be in a position where they want you to be the leader. And as Stephen Joyce, for all of his positive traits and ability to be a great minister, what he failed on was building a connection with caucus members. And when I look at Chris Bishop and Nicola Willis, the very reason why I think there will not be a change of national leader to one of those two specifically is because the MPs all sit back and they go, well, hold on, you've treated us like shit for the past 3 years or whatever it is. Why would I now vote for you to be the leader when you had a bit of power, you treated me poorly and you didn't support us and you're not a great team player? Why would I support you now if you are just going to be worse? And so Stephen Joyce was a great minister. He was good at coming up with strategies. He was a very good campaign chair, but he'd never built a connection with the caucus members. And when they had an opportunity to decide whether they wanted to support him for the leader, they simply didn't. And I think Willis and Bishop would come up with the same challenges. Why would the caucus put in place two people who are seen as the face of New Zealand's economic problems along with Luxon? And why would they put in place somebody as leader when those two are not known at all for being good supporters of their team?
I look at Chris Bishop and Nicola Willis and I look at their backgrounds. I've got some personal insights into Chris Bishop. I can remember sitting at the back bench of pub at a table with him and Tim Hurdle and a couple of other people who were all working in Jerry Brownlee's office at the time, and it was after the Christchurch earthquakes. And I said to them, if you guys don't watch out, you're going to lose, and you're going to lose because of your handling of the Christchurch earthquake. And Chris Bishop just stared down his nose at me, and he said, well, what the fuck would you know, Cam? Right? And I said, well, what I do know is there was an earthquake shortly after in Japan, and this is the damage these are the photos of the damage before. And it was ironic, there was a Daily Mail article that I brought up on my phone, and I said, look at this article, this is before and this is after. They've actually fully repaired all those roads, they've fully repaired all those buildings, they've fully repaired everything, they've cleared up the damage from the tsunami. You're still dealing with potholes and wrecked pipes. So you guys think you're doing a grand job in fixing up Christchurch, and you're not when you compare it to what the Japanese have turned around and done. And he just scoffed. He just scoffed me, and I thought, you know, you're going to want to be an MP at one point, because he had that written all over his face. And I said, you know, mate, you need to wake up. He never did. And what I see now with Chris Bishop is what I saw then, a guy who dresses poorly, looks like he's a slob, speaks down to almost everybody. Nicola Willis, I call her a scold, because when she's talking, when she's speaking, it sounds like she's telling off a child. And those are not endearing qualities for leadership, and they're not endearing qualities for a Prime Minister.
The ministers, when they're at that senior level, they become quite disconnected from the reality of everyday Kiwis. And they become very arrogant, and you would have seen, and their staff members become arrogant on their behalf, which is what you would have seen from Bishop when he was in Brownlee's office. Look, they're both highly intelligent. You have to give them that.
They've
They're
both got a pedigree in debating, right? And when you confront them with something, their first response is to debate you. Because it's like Jordan Williams, the three of them are the same. They think that if they just speak to you fervently, pound the desk for 15 more minutes, you'll be convinced of the merits of their argument. And they're wrong.
But if the government's difficulties, and when it comes to support from New Zealanders, is because cost of living, because an economy that's still stuffed from when Labour was in, if that's the biggest factor in why they're unpopular, because they haven't turned around what they said they would when they campaigned on it, the party wouldn't go and then put the very faces of their political problem in charge to try and change the face of the party when they need a wholesale change if they are to change direction.
You're entirely correct. People voted for change. We were sick of, Dafura, Ardern and Chris Hipkins and the almost tyranny that we had in that 6 years that they were in charge. If you thought that the kitchen cabinet in National was, 5 or 6 people, under Ardern it was 2 or 3 people that were doing everything. The rest of the ministers, like when you take Nanaia Mahuta, how many press releases did she put out in her 6 years as foreign minister? Almost none, right? Or 3 years as foreign minister when Winston wasn't there. If you look at any other of those ministers, Phil Twyford, he used to, glad hand his way around the building sites of Auckland saying he's going to fix everything, and you never heard a peep out of him when it became apparent after the first or second year they didn't have a hope in building 10,000 houses a year for 10 years. The ministers they had were absolutely woeful. And now we've got the ministers and they're making, this is why people are a bit shocked, because they're seeing ministers doing something, anything. It doesn't matter whether it's good or bad, they're actually doing something. And people are used to not hearing anything because that's how it was run under Ardern and Hipkins.
Well, you can't run an election campaign almost solely on we are the best economic managers, we're going to take you to the promised land, and they're not moving
and we're going to get
the
everything back on track.
Yeah. You can't run an election campaign on that and then 2 years down the track, when nothing has changed, in fact it's probably going backwards, you can't then expect people to still support you because you haven't delivered on the key promise that you went out to in the election.
And then we get Luxon doing a TikTok saying, it's all great, we've now stopped the inconvenience of pay wave fees. No one cared about them. No one was marching in the streets for the government to pass legislation to remove pay wave fees. That could all have been solved very quietly with the minister talking to some banks saying, explain to me why it's extra 2.5%. When if you just use the same card and you enter your PIN number and you put the transaction, the processing power is exactly the same. So tell me why it's 2.5% more. It looks like you're actually creating a little tax here for yourselves to dip into your pockets. But to facetiously claim that this is going to mean lower prices for people, they're dreaming. Right? Do you think the shopkeepers are going to lower their prices by 2.5%? Of course they're not.
But Cam, peel back the surface layers that the media would typically go into,
Should do. Should do.
if you peel back those layers that everyone hears about on a regular basis and delve into the deeper depths of political parties and how they work, I think your listeners and your readers of your blog are intelligent people who care about politics in general, and they care about how it's done, and they care about understanding the processes of power and how it's exercised. And one of the things that I think I've learned over the 10 or the 15 years that I was in politics is that we don't have real representative democracy in New Zealand. MMP was supposed to be this great change which was going to lead to more diverse voices
And
in
everyone
Parliament.
working together.
It's done actually the opposite, because back when Morris, we mentioned him a few times, was elected, local MPs had a real say, and local MPs had the backing of their local party to get things done, and they were the backstop against the tyranny of a all-powerful leadership. We don't have that now, because under MMP, everything has become centralised within the political parties. When you're in government, everything flows through the Prime Minister's office. The ninth floor is all powerful across the whole of government and across the whole of the political operations of the party. And you don't have real voices within the parliament anymore, and within the caucus. When you're a new,
Tell us about the
when
caucus
you're a new
room.
candidate and you're sold this story about how you go into the caucus room and that's where decisions are made and that's where you get to have a voice. No, if you speak up in the caucus, you're seen as some dunce that should sit at the back and shut your mouth and never to be seen again. There is no expectation or desire or ability for MPs to properly speak up, because everything's concentrated on the leadership and what the leadership wants. And you might ask yourself, why is that? Why have we allowed ourselves in a country like New Zealand to become that way, where everything is all based on the leaders? And it's because MMP boils everything down to that 5% or that 10% in the middle. Everything National does now is about just trying to take a few more percentage off Labour, and everything Labour does is just about trying to take a few more percentage off National. And it leads to the situation where you don't have proper representative voices. You don't have proper democracy within the political parties or within the caucus. You just have everything focused on trying to win the next election. They spend all this time focused on winning an election, and then when it comes to the post-election decision-making, set up a government, and then it's all just back to trying to campaign again and hold on to that couple of percent in the middle. MMP has led to that with the party vote, and it's led to a weakening of local MPs, and it's led to an all-powerful leadership where if you dare to ever step out of line against the leadership in even a small way, you get rinsed and you get put to the side, and you risk your livelihood and your career by ever speaking out.
And when you do speak out, then the knocking machine, and the National Party's got a very, very good knocking machine. When you sit and privately talk with Winston Peters about some of the battles he had when he was in the National Party, and you start hearing him explaining things, and he said, I couldn't work out what was happening there, and I couldn't work out what was happening there. And I'm able to tell him what was happening there because I saw how it was happening and what they were doing to get him. I saw what was happening when the National Party wanted to get Todd Barclay, for example. I saw what was happening when the National Party wanted to get you. All right? It's the same tactics every time. And I'm not saying the National Party is evil. I'm just saying those are the tactics they use, and the Labour Party and the Green Party do exactly the same thing.
It's very easy for people who just read the media or just take a cursory glance at, for example, how I ended up departing from the National Party, just to use a kinder term. It's very easy just to go, oh, he was bad and he spoke out against the party, and so of course they got rid of him. Do you not think there was months and months and months of behind-the-scenes disagreements and difficulties that led up to that? Do you really think somebody who spent their entire adult life trying to climb the political ladder just wakes up one day and decides, hey, I'm going to end my career here and I'm going to try and tear everything that I've cared about apart? No. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes, but the political parties are not willing to ever listen to different voices. The caucus is not some place where people go to and stand up and have their say. The caucus is the place where you go to and you nod and agree with what the leader has said, and you clap at the right time and tell the leader how great he is. National Party caucus meetings under John Key, maybe deservedly so because he was actually doing well in holding public support, but the caucus meetings became about just the Prime Minister saying what they were doing and what the next plans are, and then MPs would stand up and say, Prime Minister, I think that's great what you're doing, and the people of my electorate fully support what you're wanting. And the next person who wants to be a future minister would stand up and say, Prime Minister, that's great, and my electorate have been talking to this person and that person, and they think what you're doing is fabulous. There was never challenging. There was never the ability to disagree, because disagreement is not ever encouraged within a political party. We don't have representative voices because MMP has led to a situation where the leaders' offices are all powerful and disparate voices are silenced.
It goes back a long way. It goes right back to the original days of MMP and under Jim Bolger and then under Helen Clark, and that's when it really became apparent. If you got a phone call from Heather Simpson, you were in big trouble in the Labour Party. If they decided to basically withdraw the whip and have nothing more to do with you, you were a man alone in that government. Same within John Key's government. If they decide that they want you out, you're going. There's only one direction it's going, and that you're going out. And only a very, very tough person can steer that down. Maurice Williamson steered down Bill English, but it's because he had patience and he went and sat on the back bench.
It's also because National was in the 20s.
Yes. That's right. Couldn't risk a by-election because they probably would have lost it to Michael Wood.
Possibly. Yeah. Got to give them their credit in the Labour Party, because they have those union voices and they have a wider membership that isn't just solely based around the party HQ. They do have the ability for people to have the backing of, say, a union or some other interest group to support them. There's nothing like that in the National Party. And you talk about how people get rinsed. One of the things, if I look back in the time I was in the Whip's office, that I'm actually ashamed of is how I did Paula Bennett's bidding in forcing Todd Barclay out of the caucus and to resign. I am ashamed that I carried out the wishes and sat in that poor man's apartment while he was weeping, twisting his arm to resign as an MP. I feel dirty that I did that. It was my job as the chief whip. But political parties, when they want to rinse people, they do it properly and they do it well, and it's a sad sight to see. That guy had won a selection. He'd just been freshly reselected. But the party leadership decided that they wanted to take him out. They decided that he was too much of a liability and for the leader at the time, Bill English. And I don't know where the instruction from Paula came from or whether it was just Paula's idea, but she called me into her office one day and said, Todd needs to go. The Prime Minister's not happy with him. We don't want him to continue as a candidate. And I was sent off on my way to go and twist his arm into resigning. And the guy didn't deserve that. Yeah, he'd made some mistakes along the way and he'd made some bad moves. But, most first-term MPs do make some silly mistakes. But if you get offside with the leadership, they come down hard on you. And I'm really sorry that we ended up doing that to that guy.
This is the thing about Bill English that many people don't realise, just how vindictive he is. And that execution of Todd Barclay was at the behest of Bill English. He was listening to his former staff members who had an axe to grind, and then sent his Rottweiler, Paula Bennett, after him. And I've seen Bill English hold grudges for decades. Like my father's done nothing but provide service to various different things, whether he's a JP or whether he was president of the National Party or before that in volunteer positions his entire life. And every time that his name got put forward for an honour, it would go to the decision-making teams. Bill English was in those decision-making teams, and he would just get a black felt tip and run a line through my father's name every single time. And the only way that his honour got through was when Mum was dying and in the hospice, and Judith Collins and John Banks went and made a personal approach to John Key to give Dad an honour for all of his volunteer service and everything that he's done, and do it before Mum passed away. And both of them came up to the hospice and gave Dad the certificates and everything in front of Mum. And just a few days later, she died.
Your mum was an impressive lady, and I remember taking my new son Henry to see your mum. Even though she was your mum and not mine, she was just so involved in the party, and I'd gotten to know John and Margaret so well that I took my new son to see your mum just before she passed away, and it was very nice to see.
The famous falling out with Simon Bridges.
Yep.
You've talked about the things, just briefly over the top. There's months and months and months of things that were going on. Tell us a bit about that. What really happened with Simon Bridges in that year?
Well, you kind of have to go back to when Key resigned as the leader, and Bill ended up becoming the Prime Minister and the leader of the party. The real battle in 2016 was actually between Simon and Paula for the deputy leadership. I was friends with Simon and Todd McClay for most of my time that I was in Parliament, and we saw that as an opportunity when there was a vacancy in the leadership positions to really push Simon forward, to elevate his presence. He was always seen as an up-and-comer, and he was a front-bench minister, but he needed to take that next step. And I'd been an admirer of Simon's for a long time. And the point at which we decided to really pitch in hard for him was for the deputy leadership. Paula thought that she was just going to be anointed as deputy leader. Bill wanted Paula, and Key wanted English, and English wanted Paula Bennett to be the deputy, and they just thought it was going to be an anointment. We thought, no, stuff it. This is our opportunity for the first time in many years for the National Party caucus to actually have a proper decision-making and a vote on who should hold a leadership position. So against the wishes of the party leadership, we put Simon forward to be the deputy leader. And so Macleay and I really pitched in hard, twisting people's arms, trying to get enough support for Simon to be deputy leader. And Paula hated the fact that we were actually getting some traction and we were actually doing well over the space of a couple of days and trying to get Simon up as deputy leader. He eventually pulled out because we weren't going to get enough support, but it really positioned him well within the party. English became the leader, Paula became the deputy, and we went into that election, and history will show that National didn't win the negotiations when it came to Winston. And then...
Just on that, people don't believe me when I say that Bill English had no interest in participating in the negotiations, or no real interest, that he sat there in negotiations doodling on a piece of paper. Now, you would have been involved in those negotiations at some level.
It was kept very close to the powers that be, English, Joyce, when it came to the negotiating. I can't say I was involved in the negotiations, but I've heard you tell that story a couple of times before, and I don't disagree at all, but my perspective on it is different. It's that National was so arrogant and believed that they were automatically going to be reinstalled as the government and that Winston had to go with National. It was arrogance that led to them not wanting to participate in proper negotiations. So I don't know what happened in the actual room, but I do know the arrogance of it.
That answers the connection for me, because that arrogance leads to disrespect, and the worst thing you can do with Winston Peters is treat him with disrespect.
And so the night before Winston went on stage and announced he was going with the Labour Party, there were senior MPs calling around MPs that were on the cusp of the cabinet, and it's not arrogant to say, as the chief whip, I was seen as someone that was on the cusp of possibly going into the cabinet. There were calls that were going around, people in my type of category trying to let us down, to let us know that we have to give up so many seats for New Zealand First MPs. There was going to be the story was going around that we're going to be the government. There's going to be 7 New Zealand First MPs as ministers, or 5 or 6, close to 7 with undersecretaries, and people like me who were on the cusp of a ministry possibly were being let down quietly because we were going to have to give up so many seats to the New Zealand First ministers. That was the level of arrogance that was going on, that despite the poor efforts in negotiating, there was still a view very strongly that we were going to be the government, and people who would have to miss out on cabinet seats before New Zealand First places were being told that. That was happening the night before he announced he was going with Labour. So it was just arrogance that led to it. And so just getting back to the story, so it segues quite well. So Winston makes the announcement on that night, and then there's a party in the Prime Minister's office. It was a commiseration on not continuing as government, and all the staff from the Beehive were there, and MPs that were in Wellington. I was there at the time. We're all in the Prime Minister's office, lots of alcohol flowing, and English was pretty intoxicated at the time. And English came up to myself, Todd McClay, and Simon Bridges, and in a almost Muldoon-esque drunken fashion pretty much said to us, so how long do you boys expect me to hang around for? When do you want to take over? And we knew at that point that English was probably going to last a few months. He got us through the transition, and we all said the right thing at the time. Oh no, we need you to continue and help us, steer the ship. But behind the scenes, we were plotting as soon as we possibly could on how we were going to challenge for the leadership. Or not challenge, but just wait English out, because in his drunken fashion, he had told us that he was not going to stay long as leader. So we put together the team. Myself and Todd McClay were the main supporters of Simon, and we started rallying smaller groups. I got together some of the backbenchers. Most of them aren't there anymore, but Brett Hudson and Stuart Smith and my flatmate at the time, we got them together, and we were rallying teams to be in place for when it came to the leadership election. And then I think it was about February, English did decide to resign, and we pitched in hard for Simon Bridges to get him elected. Bit of trivia for people who don't remember exactly what was going on at the time. Simon did win that election. We twisted enough arms. We did get enough support for Simon against Amy Adams. But Simon did not win the leadership election on the first ballot. He won on the second ballot. Again, I was chairing the caucus meeting that elected him as the chief whip. And it's all, secrecy. We don't talk about what goes on in caucus. We even blocked off the windows in the corridor so the media couldn't see us going in and out of the caucus room. It's all supposed to be secret, but I'm not there anymore. I don't know them anything when it comes to caucus secrecy. He didn't win on the first ballot. He lost the first ballot. Stephen Joyce got the lowest number of votes and didn't go through to the second round. But by virtue of the fact that Simon won on the second ballot, by definition, a majority of the caucus didn't want him as the leader to start with. They wanted somebody else. So he did get enough support when we had the rounds of voting, but he didn't have enough support to start off with. Simon had this arrogance that came with being leader, but I think so much of it was fueled by his number 2 behind him, which again, that name we mention, Paula Bennett. And so I think, looking back at it in hindsight, Simon was arrogant and did think because, Labour had fewer votes than National did in the Parliament, that we were the natural government and we just had to wait them out for them to implode and then we could take over again. But the person that was really pulling the strings, perhaps in a fashion that didn't engender public support for Simon, the person that was pulling those puppet strings was Paula. There we go again, Paula Bennett behind the scenes pulling the puppet strings. And so I was unhappy with how Simon treated me at the start. And, you can believe it or not, but when you support somebody over several years to become the leader of a political party and they've made you a whole lot of promises, you expect when they become the leader that they would
That's what's called
that
loyalty.
they would ensure that the promises of jobs and positions that they assured you of would come to fruition. And that wasn't the case. And so I was bitterly disappointed that this person who I'd supported for many years, first to try and become deputy leader and then to become leader, ended up shitting on me and not giving me the loyalty back that I'd given him for many, many years. Now, you can say, tough luck, that's just how politics works, too bad, suck it up. Well, I didn't. I should have let it go and I should have got over it, but I was bitterly disappointed
They tore
that
your undies and you thought,
somebody that I'd supported and helped to become the leader of the party and was one of two people who twisted arms of MPs to get him there, as soon as he was in the position, didn't show the loyalty back that I'd shown him. And that was the start of the unravelling of my relationship with Simon
loyalty is a
Bridges.
two-way street.
Yeah.
Right? If you are loyal to someone, when you need assistance, you kind of expect that loyalty to come back the other way. And when it doesn't, you sort of take stock and go, okay, that's the way you want to play it then.
Yeah. So whether you think it's right or wrong, regardless of your thoughts on how it happened, was the genesis of the unravelling of the relationship between me and Simon. It was feeling as though somebody you'd given support to didn't give that support
I can
back.
understand that completely.
And then as the time went on, Simon's ability to connect with New Zealanders wasn't coming to fruition. He wasn't doing so well on the personality popularity stakes with the public. Jacinda was improving as Prime Minister. We all just, as National, likes to think that they're the natural party of government and we just have to wait for the other guys to fall apart. Jacinda wasn't falling apart. Winston, as deputy under Jacinda, was doing a great job of providing tutelage to her to become a good Prime Minister. And they were holding that government together. And so as Simon became more and more unpopular, as somebody who was already pissed off on a personal level with Simon, I started talking to people out of school about how I felt he was doing. And I was putting on a brave face in the meetings with him, but it was obvious that I was so pissed off with personal treatment that I was agitating behind the scenes.
Which was
seeing that eventually the popularity was going in the wrong direction. And because I was still involved in you can't call it the kitchen cabinet because we weren't in government, but it was sort of the opposition equivalent of the kitchen cabinet. I was seeing the polling. I was getting the polling from David Farrer. Todd McClay was the main person that had it, but Todd and I would meet with Farrer to talk about the polling and meet with some other advisors to talk about the direction. And the indicators were all bad. The indicators were showing that Simon's popularity was declining, and rather than improving his connection with New Zealanders, it was going in the opposite direction. And as somebody who was not particularly happy with him, I started agitating behind the scenes. But you can't agitate behind the scenes with a caucus if there isn't already doubts about the leader's ability. You could never agitate behind the scenes with John Key because the caucus just absolutely believed in the direction he was going in. The caucus was very sceptical of the direction Simon was taking the caucus in, and so it was easy to agitate behind the scenes.
See, my observations of Simon Bridges was he was a smart man who lacked that raw political skill that John Key had. And we saw that actually, several months apart, once when John Key appeared on John Campbell's show and with no notes or anything, and just tore John Campbell apart. It was over the spying stuff and all of that sort of carry on. John Campbell, of course, being a hand-wringing lefty, was making a big deal of it, and John Key tore him apart. A few months later, Simon Bridges was on the show with John Campbell and tried to do the same thing and got torn apart by John Campbell. That, for me, was the wake-up call into seeing that Simon Bridges really doesn't have that natural instinct as a politician, that he's rather performative. And then when he was there with Paula Bennett, it was Paula Bennett that was actually running the show, not him. And not many people have ever picked that up. But it was the same when they decided to rinse you.
Simon is a highly intelligent
He is.
individual who was able to effectively carry out his duties as a minister, and he was pretty good at coming up with plans and policies that were successful. But the problem we had as a party at that time, and I'm not sure Nationals quite learnt the mistakes yet, is we just thought we had John Key, he was the leader, everyone listened to him. We've got the secret sauce that the New Zealanders want, and we just have to wait for them to
arrogance.
wake up again, and they'll decide that yep, we should be there, and they made a bad mistake.
It's that
with
arrogance that eventually
Yeah.
causes you harm. And
So-
John Key said I remember him saying to me, I said to him, why are you pushing a flag change? No one wants it. And he said, oh, well, everybody loves me. I'm the Prime Minister. I've got the highest rankings ever. If I say I want a flag change and we have a referendum on it, that's what will happen. I said, I've got news for you. It's all bad. And he said, why do you say that? I said, well, the Labour Party will come out and oppose you. He says, but it's in their manifesto. Has been for years that they want to change the flag. I said, yes, they want to change the flag. As soon as you say you want to change the flag and we'll have a referendum, they'll be against it because they want to be the ones that change the flag. And that's exactly what happened.
So National's biggest downfall, I think, is just a sheer arrogance of assuming that New Zealanders will always want National to be in charge.
Yeah.
And we had that bad. We thought, wow, we were great. We got more votes than Labour. We just have to wait for the New Zealanders to wake up and see that we should be great. And so Simon, highly intelligent, good minister, but didn't really connect with New Zealanders because we had this underlying belief that we just had to wait for them. And he used to go around and say, she will listen to me, he will listen to me because they know that I'm going to be the Prime Minister in 2 years' time. It was that arrogance that was, I think, undoing of him and actually led to the public turning off. But Paula stoked those flames. She was the puppet master behind the scenes that led Simon into that direction of just believing in himself without enough justification.
I have to bring up the topic of foreign influence, because that was the key thrust when charges were laid against you by the Serious Fraud Office. You were saying there's a malign influence in New Zealand politics. In my experience, it comes from the CCP in China, and you started telling tales.
Yes. When I got into Parliament, I was aware, probably in a way that not many MPs have been aware, that you need to fundraise to build a base. And in fact, our mutual friend taught me that. I was in a constituency with a very high Asian population. It soon became apparent to me that you could fundraise very effectively within migrant communities. Labour does this a lot with Indians, National does it to a certain extent. Labour does it a little bit with Chinese, National does it in a big way. It was very easy, a lot easier to fundraise from the Chinese community than from Kiwi, New Zealand, European communities. And so with a high Asian population, I was able to tap into some of those networks. But what I wasn't aware of, and didn't become aware of properly, was the Chinese expat community that has a lot of connections to mainland China CCP politics. A lot of that money and that support for political parties flows through to the parties as a long-term foreign influence over New Zealand politics attempt. It's a long-term strategy that the CCP takes in New Zealand and other countries around the world. So much of the money that we were fundraising, we didn't really have our eyes wide open enough, was coming through CCP sources. And so as a fundraiser for the National Party, and I was pretty good at it, I was bringing in a couple of $100,000 a year for the National Party. And I'm not saying it's money that flew directly from Beijing to Auckland. It didn't. It comes via political associations. But that is how the CCP influences political parties over a long period of time. And what is now apparent to me, wasn't at the time, was they're really good at picking younger, relatively new MPs and supporting them over many, many elections. And so I won't say there were people in the Labour Party that were in the same situation as me. They had the support of Chinese communities as a young politician, up and coming, and the fundraising really enables you to gain influence on the track upwards.
And that's what the trials of 2022 showed,
Yep.
wasn't it? That there was this influence peddling by Chinese nationals that were living in New Zealand, had gained citizenship or permanent residency, but their loyalties were not to New Zealand. They were to the party from where they came from.
But political parties in New Zealand don't have a lot of money. A lot of people wrongly believe that political parties are wealthy. They are not. They have to fundraise millions of dollars every year, and in an election year, a lot more. And so our political parties, because there isn't the American-style trend of
There's
grassroots.
no PACs, there's no political action committees like...
Correct.
Yeah, Turning Point, for example, doesn't exist in New
And
Zealand.
so where do you go to for funding? You go to the easiest sources. What's one of the easiest sources of funding for a political party? It's the Chinese communities, the Chinese associations, the Chinese fundraisers. And this isn't just a national problem, it's a Labour problem as well. The New Zealand First SFO donation trial was very different. It wasn't focused on Chinese money. Winston's smarter than that. But National and Labour took and still do take huge
the
amounts
National
of
Party's
money.
still got all that money.
But
They've never given
but
it
they
back.
still continue. And it's a real sad state of affairs where the two major political parties in New Zealand, knowing that much of the money that's coming from Chinese associations is flowing from Beijing for the purposes of influencing our politics in New Zealand, still continues to take money from Chinese associations and Chinese events and Chinese fundraisers for the political party because it's an easy source of money, and they just try and blindly ignore the fact that it's CCP money flowing into New Zealand for the purposes of buying influence over a long period of time. I'm of the view that you should only be allowed to donate to a political party in New Zealand if you're entitled to vote. I don't think companies should be able to donate. I don't think foreign individuals should be able to donate. I don't think unions should be able to donate. I think it should just be natural persons that are enrolled to vote, that are legally able to vote, should be able to donate to a political party. And that would provide another layer of scrutiny to who's donating. It wouldn't fix the problem entirely. The only way to fix the problem is to continue pouring sunlight to disinfect that CCP problem we have in money in New Zealand politics. But it's still happening. It's not as if it was just some aberration that happened and it's all gone now. It still is the case. National and Labour still get huge amounts of money from CCP-aligned communities.
It's been going on for a long time, and I can remember when you worked in Maurice Williamson's office as a teenager, before you went into council. I think you were sitting there. And the National Party is a member of the IDU, the International Democratic Union. There's another political party based in that area around China that's also a member of the IDU, and that's the Kuomintang, who of course are the government in Taiwan, the Republic of China. And National Party people would go to events and wear a KMT pin on their jacket. A lot of them had them. I know many people had them. My father had one. And they would go to these events because it was a sister party from the IDU. In fact, my father met one of the presidents of Taiwan at one point. I've got a photo of him with the guy. And the National Party was very much aligned to this construct that there was two systems, one country but two systems. That was the official line that the National Party had, but quietly behind the scenes we're on Taiwan's side. And that changed. I saw that change slowly, but it changed very dramatically under John Key. And to the point where I'm aware that caucus members were told no longer to attend, national functions for the Taiwanese government when they would have a consular party for their Independence Day or whatever. The national MPs were told to disassociate themselves from dealing with Taiwan in any way, shape or form. And then we started to see John Key travelling to China, meeting with Xi Jinping. We started to see National Party people getting on the boards of Chinese companies that were in New Zealand. We started to see all of this sort of thing going on. And that, to me, was an alarm bell that saw me start distancing myself from the National Party as well. I saw themselves as being bought by the CCP, by the Chinese government. And I still think that today. And when you see John Key in the media quite regularly, at least once or twice a month, coming out saying pro-Chinese things, I start immediately thinking, oh, we've got another Bob Carr on our hands here.
We've put so many of our eggs in the Chinese basket, economically, politically, as a country. We are in a situation where we have so much reliant on that relationship that pissing off the Chinese, it's not good for democracy in our country that we are in this position, but we are. If you just go back into how this exposure of political donations came about within my story and how it ended up in the media, it all links back to the declining relationship I had with Simon Bridges. Had I not had that big blow up with Bridges, the Chinese donation stuff wouldn't have come out. It only came out because
it was a bomb that you could set off.
Yes. And it was something that I was becoming more and more disturbed about over time as my eyes were waking up. But like everybody else in the party, I was willingly blind to what the real situation with the foreign influence over the political parties were. But the reason that it all became public and it all came out was because of the fact that I had been agitating behind the scenes with Simon to the point where he decided that it was time to move me on. Leaders have the right to decide who's in their team and who's not, and Simon was exercising that right. But
was he?
Well, had he listened to some of the things I was trying to say around we need to change our direction and strategy, maybe things would have been a bit different, but he didn't want to hear any other voices. But the political parties, when they don't like somebody and they don't like a voice that's speaking out against them, they don't sit down and have a reasonable chat and decide if we can work out our differences. They just decide you're speaking out,
but
you've got a different point of view.
You?
You've got a different point of view. We're going to just cast you aside now. And most people, when they see the buses coming for them and they see that the party leadership is coming down and they're going to try and squash them, most people just roll over and go, oh, well, I'm done now, I'll move on. Whatever it is, whether it's that, little fight I had in me from a young boy in a boarding school, having to work my way up the food chain myself, having to work my way up the political hierarchy and system myself and fight for everything that I'd tried to gain, whether it was that part of me that said, no, I'm not going to just have this, I'm going to stand up for myself again, or whether it was something else, I don't know. But I decided at that point in time, they're about to run the bus over me. They're throwing me under this bus. Do I just go willingly and sit up the back bench for 2 years and then depart, never to be seen again? Or am I going to do what I felt was right and just at the time, maybe in a poor state of mind, making bad decisions? But I thought, no, if they're going to try and throw me under the bus unjustifiably, in my view, I'm going to blow this bus up at the same time.
Or in front of the train, actually.
If they're going to throw me under the bus, I'm not going to let them just quietly do that. I'm going to blow the bus up.
You did try and meet them, though. I mean,
yes.
I know that you did, and I know that you said, I'll go and sit up the back and do all of this. And I think Simon Bridges might have entertained that, but the other person who was in the room has told me that all of the decision-making during that discussion with you and Paula Bennett and Simon Bridges and there was 4 people in that room, the other person is our mutual friend, that it was Paula Bennett that was lining everything up. It was Paula Bennett that was making the decisions. It was Paula Bennett that was prodding Simon Bridges to go to war with you.
Well,
And
by
he's
the
a
point
pretty
at which
astute observer of people.
by the point at which we had the meeting you're referring to, this is 15th of October 2018, I was in a pretty bad shape. I was when they pile huge amounts of pressure on you over several weeks and they're trying to squash you and destroy your career. This is before anything blew up publicly. I was under huge amounts of pressure and I was not coping. I was not in a good mental state. I don't remember everything around that meeting.
I know what that's like.
But we had, Simon becomes leader in February. We have a falling out around April, May. I'm agitating behind the scenes. Come September, I get called into his office in Parliament House, and I walk into a meeting thinking it's just going to be me and Simon, it's Paula, it's the Chief of Staff, and me, and I sit down on the couch thinking, whoa, I'm outnumbered here. There's a firing squad that's just been lined up and I'm about to be taken out. You only have split seconds to decide what to do. And they were deciding they were telling me that, I'd been disloyal and I hadn't supported Simon enough, and, they weren't happy with it and they needed me to go to the backbench. And I just knew in those split seconds that you have to make a decision, I just knew that if they're sending me to the backbench, from the front bench to the backbench, you never come back from that.
It's a long way.
Well,
you can.
Well,
Morris did it. Morris did it.
Almost never. Very few examples. But I thought, they're throwing me under this bus and I'm not going to survive this. And throughout this meeting, which lasted about 10 minutes, they were telling me how there was all these allegations against me.
Sure there were.
There were all these things that I'd done and I'd been disloyal and I needed to go to the backbench. And I just thought to myself, I'm not going to get anywhere by sitting in this room with people. In the middle of mid-sentence, as Simon was telling me that I had to leave, I just stood up, had to go to the backbench. I just stood up, walked out the door and went back to my apartment because I thought they can't make decisions about me if I'm not here. Went back to my apartment. The very next day, I met with Simon again. He wanted me to meet with the firing squad at the same time. I refused to do that. I said, no, I'm only going to meet with you one-on-one. This is between you and me, Simon. So if you want me to meet with you, I'll meet with you one-on-one. He eventually agreed to have the one-on-one meeting. And that's when I said to him at that meeting, hey, you're treating me pretty badly here. I don't believe that this is fair, what you're putting me through. I've been really loyal to you over a long period of time. If you're going to do this to me and throw me under the bus and make me go to the backbench, then I'm going to expose what National does around donations, and I'm going to expose the Chinese influence in our political party, and that's going to be really damaging for the party and for you as well, personally as leader. And, had he just decided at that point in time to listen to what I was trying to say, we could have avoided that whole explosion that happened. But history suggests he didn't, and I went through with the threats to expose things, and we tried to have a further meeting to sort things out. It didn't go very far. I blew the whistle. It all blew up. They decided to try and
we've all seen the rest of it, haven't we?
And it all just went badly from there, and I sat on the back bench.
But you've got yourself sorted out now. You seem to be in a much happier space. When we have lunch every Monday, you're back to the old Jami-Lee that I met 20 years ago. And we've kind of gone full circle now because that old Jami-Lee is now standing for the local board and you're wanting to do some more service.
Well, when you've had life come down really hard on you, and I'm not saying I was perfect and did everything
Nobody's
right,
perfect.
I didn't. I made lots of mistakes and I made lots of decisions in a bad mental state that I shouldn't have made at the time. I didn't listen to people. I made mistakes. I know that. I own it. I didn't know it at the time. I was still in that rah, rah, fight mode. But when you look back at at it all, and you realize the mistakes you've made, and you realize you're under huge amounts of pressure, and it led you to make some bad decisions, and you spend time working on yourself, and you spend time reconnecting with family and reconnecting with friends. And I love the relationship I have with my kids now. I was an absent father because I was an MP and I was hardly ever around, and when I was in Auckland I was off at different events doing this and that, and I almost never put them to bed or bath them. I've got a great relationship with my kids now. My son's 13, my daughter's 10. I'm not together with their mother. I've got a great partner now, but I have a great relationship with my kids, and I spend time with friends like you and others that we've mentioned. Every Monday we have lunch together, and just finding yourself and what makes you happy is really important for getting back up on your feet. And it's been 5 years since I left the Parliament. There's huge amounts about the Parliament that I don't miss, and I'm glad I'm not part of. But what I did actually really enjoy back in those early days when I was on the City Council as a bright 18, 19-year-old with this bright spark in my eye, I enjoyed getting things done at the local level for people as a city councillor. And with the council elections coming along, I looked at the landscape and looked at what was going on in my local area of Flatbush and decided I wanted to give it a go again and get back into it and get back into local government. And some people have said I'm trying for a comeback or whatnot. I just view it as trying to contribute some skills that I have to my local community. I enjoyed being on the City Council and helping out people locally. I think there's some infrastructure difficulties that we need to overcome in Flatbush, and I won't go through them here because I know your audience is pretty wide and across the whole country or internationally, but I enjoyed my start in politics and contributing at a local level and being an effective representative for people. I think I've still got some skills that I can put to good use in local government.
You were good at it when you were a local councillor, and you were an effective MP. So I think Flatbush or the local area that you're standing in are going to get a real advocate for that community. And
we'll find out in a couple of weeks.
As you know, we've been encouraging you at lunch to do it.
Thank you.
And I think you'll be successful. I hope you're successful.
Thanks.
Well, I think that's about all we've got time for now, Jami-Lee. So thanks so much for coming on to the Good Oil podcast, and it's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Cam. Good to be with you, and it's been great being your mate for 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for being my mate for 20 years as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Hey, now welcome to the show, where the wind's blowing strong and the truth can flow. This is the Good Oil. Catch a vibe today with Cam Slater leading us all the way.